The smell of roasted coffee and fresh pastries hit me the moment I stepped inside, a warm and welcoming fragrance that, until today, had always lifted my spirits. I wasn't a regular at Vince's Corner Cafe, but I knew it well enough. It was the kind of place you'd find tucked on a quiet street, where people liked to linger over conversations that went long past their lunch breaks. My wife, Emma, had worked here part-time for the past 6 months. She always called it a simple job to keep busy, though I often wondered why she needed to keep busy at all. I wasn't supposed to be here. The only reason I came by was because I'd taken the afternoon off work, something that rarely happened. I figured I'd surprise her, maybe catch a glimpse of her carrying trays or chatting with customers. She had a way of brightening any room, and a small part of me wanted to see that for myself again. Lately, things between us had felt off. I couldn't explain it exactly, but she wasn't the same Emma who used to laugh at my bad jokes and hum while she cooked dinner. I ordered a coffee and sat near the window, my gaze drifting around the cozy interior as I waited. I could see the counter where Vince, the cafe's owner, stood wiping down glasses. He was a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s, with a slick charm that made him popular with the customers. I'd only met him once, and even then, something about him had set me on edge. Emma had brushed off my concerns, laughing at my jealous streak. That's when I saw them. At a small table near the back, in a shadowy corner partially obscured by a decorative plant, sat Emma. She wasn't in her work uniform, nor did she seem like a woman on a lunch break. Her hand was resting on Vince's arm, her fingers lightly tracing the sleeve of his shirt. The gesture was intimate, natural, as if they'd done it 1,000 times before. She was smiling at him, really smiling, like I hadn't seen her do in months. Vince leaned in, close enough that their heads nearly touched, whispering something that made her laugh softly. I froze, my hand tightening around the cup of coffee I hadn't touched yet. My mind scrambled to make sense of the scene in front of me, but there was no denying what I saw. It wasn't just a friendly conversation. It wasn't two coworkers sharing a casual moment. No, this was something else entirely. Emma shifted in her seat, and her gaze briefly swept across the room. Our eyes locked. For a split second, she looked startled, like a child caught sneaking a cookie before dinner. But then, just as quickly, her expression hardened. She didn't jump up or rush over to explain. She didn't even pretend to be embarrassed. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, crossed her legs, and smirked as if daring me to react. Vince noticed her shift in attention and turned to see me as well. His reaction was less composed. He straightened up, cleared his throat, and glanced away, suddenly interested in the pattern of the tablecloth. I should have stood up. I should have stormed over and demanded an explanation. But I didn't. My legs felt rooted to the floor, and my mind was caught in a loop of disbelief. How long had this been going on? Was this why Emma had been so distant lately? I thought back to the nights she came home late, the sudden excuses, the phone she always kept face down on the counter. I gripped the cup tighter, the heat seeping into my palm as the betrayal settled like a lead weight in my chest. Emma wasn't panicking. She wasn't fumbling for an excuse. No, she was sitting there calmly, like she had all the power in the world. And maybe she did. But as I sat there, stunned and unable to move, one thought echoed through my mind. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. I finally forced myself to stand, though my knees felt like they might buckle under the weight of everything crashing down around me. The warmth of the cafe, the familiar hum of conversations, and the clinking of cups, it all felt distant, muted, as if I were trapped behind a wall of glass watching a life that wasn't mine. Emma didn't move. She tilted her head slightly, studying me like I was a piece of furniture she wasn't sure she wanted anymore. Vince shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but he didn't dare look at me. He knew. Of course, he knew. Cowards always do. With slow, deliberate steps, I made my way across the cafe, weaving between tables where people were blissfully unaware of the war exploding inside my head. When I reached their table, I stood there silently, waiting for Emma to say something. Anything. A part of me still clung to the ridiculous hope that there was an explanation that would make this all go away. She didn't give me that luxury. Instead, She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms, her smirk fading into something colder, crueler. "Well," she said, her voice as casual as if she were commenting on the weather, "this is awkward, isn't it?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My mind was spinning too fast, trying to grasp how she could be so nonchalant, how she could look at me, the man she'd shared a home and a life with, and act like I was nothing more than an inconvenient interruption. Vince cleared his throat and started to stand, but Emma shot him a glare that made him freeze. "Sit down," she snapped. "I can handle this." Handle what, exactly? The destruction of our marriage? The wreckage of everything I thought we had? She turned her attention back to me, her gaze sharp and unyielding. "What do you want, Noah? To scream? To cry? Go ahead. Make a scene if it'll make you feel better." The venom in her voice stunned me. I had expected excuses, tears, maybe even a fake apology. But this was something I hadn't prepared for. I stared at her, my throat tightening as I tried to find the right words. "How long?" I finally managed to choke out. Her lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth behind it. "Does it matter?" Yes, it mattered more than anything. But I didn't say that. I just stood there, drowning in the silence between us while she leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table like we were discussing dinner plans. "You always think you're the victim," she said, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "But you've been checked out of this marriage for a long time, Noah. Don't pretend like you didn't see this coming." That was when the first crack in my composure appeared. I didn't see this coming. My voice was sharper than I intended, but I couldn't help it. "I worked my ass off for us, for you. You're the one sneaking around in cafes like this is some kind of game." Her eyes flashed with something dangerous, like I had struck a nerve. "Oh, please," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "You've been so focused on your job that you haven't noticed me for months. Don't act like you're the perfect husband. You want a wife who'd wait around and be grateful for the crumbs of attention you threw her." I felt the sting of her words, but beneath it, something else was stirring. Anger, yes, but also clarity. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about the version of Emma sitting in front of me now. A woman I didn't recognize, a woman who didn't care if she destroyed everything we had as long as she came out on top. "Vince," I said, turning my gaze to the man who had been sitting there like a statue. "You've got a lot of nerve." He finally looked up, but before he could say anything, Emma cut him off again. "Don't you dare start threatening him," she hissed. "This isn't his fault." I laughed bitterly. "Of course it isn't. It never is, right?" The room felt suffocating, and I realized I couldn't stand there much longer without exploding. I looked at Emma one last time, searching for any sign of the woman I had married. But all I saw was someone who had already made up her mind, someone who had decided I was disposable. "You don't get to blame me for this," I said quietly, my voice steadier now. "I didn't make you cheat. That's on you." She shrugged, like it didn't matter, like I didn't matter. I turned and walked out of the cafe, the cold air hitting me like a slap to the face. But even as I walked down the street, my fists clenched at my sides, I knew this wasn't over. I wasn't ready to let her walk away from this without consequences. I walked for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 15 minutes. The chill of the air bit at my skin, but it did little to cool the fire raging inside me. My mind replayed the scene at the cafe on a loop. The way Emma smirked, the way Vince cowered, the way she blamed me without a shred of guilt. Every step I took felt like an attempt to outrun the anger and confusion clawing at my chest. But I couldn't outrun it. I found myself standing outside our house, staring at the front door like it was a portal to a life I no longer understood. How many nights had I come home here, exhausted but relieved to see Emma waiting inside? How many times had I ignored the small cracks in our marriage, convinced that they were just temporary? I thought back to the nights when she said she was working late or grabbing drinks with friends. All lies, every last one of them. Without thinking, I shoved the key into the lock and pushed the door open. The house was quiet, but it wasn't comforting like it used to be. The air felt heavy, suffocating, as if it knew the truth before I did. I tossed my keys onto the table and paced the living room, my eyes darting around the space we had built together. The framed photos on the wall mocked me. Smiling vacation shots, family gatherings. Her in that stupid sun hat she loved, me with my arm around her, oblivious to what was coming. I grabbed one of the frames and almost threw it across the room, but I stopped myself at the last second, my fingers trembling as I set it back down. I couldn't destroy the evidence of what once was. Not yet. A sudden noise made me freeze, a car pulling into the driveway. I moved to the window and peeked through the blinds. Emma. She stepped out of the car with the same calm, collected demeanor she had at the cafe, like nothing had happened. She didn't rush to the door. She didn't look over her shoulder to see if I had followed her. No, she was completely at ease, as if she were walking into a home where everything was perfectly normal. I waited by the door, listening to the jingle of her keys and the soft creak of the door opening. When she stepped inside and saw me standing there, her expression didn't change. If anything, she looked annoyed, like I was an inconvenience she hadn't planned for. "You're home," she said, closing the door behind her. "That's surprising." I folded my arms across my chest. "We need to talk." She sighed. Setting her purse on the table like this was just another day. "Do we, though?" "Because I think everything's already been said." The audacity, the sheer, unapologetic arrogance dripping from her voice made my blood boil. "How long has it been going on, Emma?" She rolled her eyes. "Does it really matter, Noah? You already saw what you saw. Digging up the details isn't going to change anything. I want to hear you say it." She laughed bitterly and ran a hand through her hair, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Fine. You want the truth. It's in a few months. It started small, just talking, flirting. But things escalated. There. Happy now." The floor felt like it was shifting beneath me, but I held my ground. "Why him? Why Vince?" She shrugged. "He noticed me. He made me feel wanted. Something you haven't done in a long time." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "So instead of talking to me about it, you ran to him?" Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, her composure cracked. "You wouldn't have listened. You've been so wrapped up in your job, in your world, that you didn't care what was happening to me. I needed someone, Noah, and Vince was there." I shook my head, trying to make sense of her twisted logic. "You think that justifies this? You think that makes it okay?" "I don't need to justify anything to you," she snapped. I did what I had to do to feel alive again. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't let her see the impact. "You didn't just destroy our marriage, Emma. You destroyed any chance of fixing it." She smirked again, that same infuriating smirk from the cafe. Maybe it was broken long before today. I stared at her, wondering how the woman I had loved for years could be standing in front of me with such cold detachment. She wasn't crying. She wasn't apologizing. She was standing there, perfectly comfortable in the destruction she had caused. But then, a flicker of something crossed her face, just for a second, but it was enough. Guilt? Regret? I couldn't tell. And before I could ask, she turned away and started walking up the stairs. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She paused at the bottom step and glanced over her shoulder. "To pack a bag. I'm staying at a hotel tonight. You can have the house to yourself and think about whatever it is you need to think about." And just like that, she was gone, her footsteps fading as she disappeared upstairs, leaving me standing there with nothing but the sound of the front door creaking in the wind. This wasn't over. Not even close. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the staircase Emma had just climbed. Her words echoed in my mind, each one twisting the knife she'd buried in my back. "You can have the house to yourself." As if she was doing me a favor. As if she hadn't just shattered everything we had built together. I walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and grabbed a beer. The cold bottle felt like an anchor, something to hold on to while my thoughts spiraled out of control. I sat at the table, the same one where we had eaten countless meals together, where we'd laughed, argued, and made plans for a future that now felt like a cruel joke. The sound of drawers opening and closing upstairs reminded me that she was still here, moving through our home as if she hadn't just confessed to months of betrayal. My fingers drummed against the table as I stared at the beer, my appetite for it fading fast. What was I supposed to do now? Call a lawyer? Kick her out for good? Or let her walk out the door like she had all the power? A sudden urge to confront her again hit me, but I forced myself to stay seated. No, I needed to think, to process. But how could I do that when every room in this house was haunted by memories of her, of us? I ran my hand over the surface of the table, remembering the day we bought it. We had spent hours at the furniture store, arguing over whether we needed something practical or stylish. In the end, she had won, as she always did. I let her win back then because I thought small victories kept her happy. Clearly, I had been wrong. The creak of the floorboards snapped me out of my thoughts. I looked up and saw her descending the stairs, a small overnight bag slung over her shoulder. She didn't look at me as she made her way toward the front door. No hesitation, no last-minute change of heart, just cold determination. I couldn't let her leave like this, not without saying something. I stood and followed her to the door. "So that's it?" I asked. "You're just walking out?" She paused, her hand on the doorknob, but she didn't turn around. "I think we both need some space." I wanted to laugh. Space. As if space would erase what she had done. As if distance could fix a betrayal this deep. "Space isn't going to change the fact that you cheated on me, Emma." Finally, she turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "And what do you want me to do, Noah? Beg for forgiveness? Cry? Because I'm not doing that. You don't get to play the victim here." The sheer audacity of her words made my chest tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I'm not asking you to beg. I'm asking you to take responsibility." She sighed, her shoulders sagging as if she were exhausted by the conversation. "I'm taking responsibility. That's why I'm leaving. I need time to figure out what I want." "What you want?" I repeated bitterly. "And what about what I want?" She didn't answer. Instead, she opened the door and stepped outside, the cold evening air rushing in behind her. "I'll call you," she said over her shoulder, as if this were some kind of temporary separation rather than the end of everything. I watched her walk to her car, her figure illuminated by the dim glow of the street lamp. She didn't look back. Not once. The engine roared to life, and within moments, she was gone, leaving behind the scent of her perfume and the hollow echo of her footsteps. I closed the door and leaned against it, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. I wanted to scream, to punch the wall, to do something that would release the storm inside me. But instead, I stood there in silence, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a boulder I couldn't move. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me back to reality. I pulled it out and stared at the screen. A text from an unknown number. "You deserve better than her. If you want to talk, I'm here." I blinked, rereading the message to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made my stomach twist. Who would send something like this? My mind raced through the possibilities, but one name stood out above the rest. Vince. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. Was this some kind of sick game to him? Was he trying to rub salt in the wound after what I saw at the cafe? Or was he trying to manipulate me into reacting in a way that would make me look like the bad guy? I tossed the phone onto the couch and paced the living room, my thoughts spinning out of control. If it was Vince, I had two options: ignore him or confront him. But what if it wasn't him? What if it was someone else? Someone who knew more about Emma's affair than I did? The possibilities were endless, and none of them felt good. I sat down on the couch, my head in my hands. The betrayal was bad enough, but now there was a new layer to the nightmare, one that I hadn't expected. Whoever sent that text knew more than they were letting on, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to find out what they knew or if I should walk away before I got dragged even deeper. But deep down, I knew the answer. I couldn't walk away. Not yet. This wasn't over. The text buzzed around in my mind like a fly caught in a spider's web, refusing to let me rest. I tried ignoring it, convincing myself that it was bait, something designed to pull me further into Emma's twisted mess. But the more I thought about it, the more my curiosity burned. Someone out there knew something. Someone thought I deserved the truth. Finally, after pacing the room for what felt like hours, I grabbed my phone and typed a reply. "Who is this?" I stared at the screen, waiting for a response. Seconds ticked by, then minutes. Nothing. The silence was maddening. I tossed the phone onto the coffee table and leaned back against the couch, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Had I just played into someone's trap? What if Vince was laughing at me right now, showing Emma my message like it was some kind of joke. But before I could spiral any further, the phone buzzed. Meet me at the park bench by Willow Creek. Midnight. I'll tell you everything. I sat up straight, rereading the message 3 times. Midnight? The park by Willow Creek? It sounded like something out of a bad thriller movie, but I couldn't ignore it. If this person knew something that could help me make sense of Emma's betrayal, I had to take the risk. I grabbed my jacket and car keys, the cold air outside slapping me awake as I stepped into the night. The streets were eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that made you second-guess every decision you'd ever made. My headlights cut through the darkness as I drove to the park, the same park where Emma and I used to take weekend walks before life got too busy, or before I stopped noticing the signs of her slipping away. When I arrived, the park was deserted. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows across the empty benches and winding paths. I parked the car and sat for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I debated whether this was a mistake. But then, in the distance, I saw a figure sitting on the bench by the creek, their face obscured by a hoodie. I stepped out of the car, my breath visible in the cold night air. The crunch of gravel beneath my shoes felt deafening as I approached the bench, my pulse pounding in my ears. When I was close enough, the figure looked up, and my heart stopped. It wasn't Vince. It was Jenna, Emma's co-worker at the cafe. I remembered her from a few times I had visited. She was quiet, always polite, but there had been something guarded about her, like she carried secrets she couldn't share. "What are you doing here?" I asked, the confusion evident in my voice. She pulled down her hoodie, revealing tear-streaked cheeks and eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sleep in days. "I'm the one who texted you." "What?" My voice was sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. "What do you know about Emma and Vince?" She glanced around nervously, as if expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. "I know more than I should," she said quietly, "and I can't keep it to myself anymore." I sat down next to her, my mind racing. "Start talking." Jenna took a deep breath, her fingers twisting in her lap. "Emma and Vince didn't just start this a few months ago. It's been going on for over a year. They've been careful, texting from burner phones, meeting up when they thought no one was watching. But I saw things. I heard things. I felt the blood drain from my face. A year? Emma had been lying to me for that long? My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Why are you telling me this now?" She looked down at her hands, guilt flickering across her face. "Because it's worse than you think. Vince isn't just having an affair with your wife. He's using her. Using her how?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "To get to you." I blinked, not sure if I had heard her correctly. "What does that mean?" She hesitated, as if the weight of her next words might crush her. "Vince has been planning this for a while. He knew who you were before Emma even started working at the cafe. He knows about your job, your connections. He's been manipulating her to get to you, Noah." My mind reeled. None of this made sense. Why would he do that? What does he want from me? Jenna swallowed hard. Leverage. Financial or professional. I don't know the details. But Emma wasn't just cheating because she was unhappy. Vince made sure she felt that way. He pushed her into this, and now he's got her exactly where he wants her. I stared at her, my breath coming in short bursts. The betrayal I felt earlier was nothing compared to the storm raging inside me now. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was a calculated attack, and Emma had walked right into it. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked again, my voice softer this time. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Because I can't stand watching him destroy people anymore." And because she hesitated, then looked me straight in the eyes. "Emma doesn't see it yet, but she's disposable to him. Once he gets what he wants, he'll drop her. I thought you should know before it's too late." I sat there in stunned silence, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a vice. I had come here looking for answers, and now that I had them, I wasn't sure what to do with them. Confront Emma again? Go after Vince? Or walk away and let them destroy each other? But deep down, I knew walking away wasn't an option. Not anymore. This wasn't just personal, it was war. The drive home was a blur. The streetlights flashed past like ghosts in the night, but my mind was stuck on one thing. Vince had played me from the start. He had watched my life, found my weaknesses, and exploited them. Emma wasn't just a cheating wife. She was the perfect tool he had used to get under my skin and into my world. And now, she didn't even realize she was disposable. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my plan had started to form. I wasn't going to confront Emma. Not yet. I wasn't going to give her or Vince the satisfaction of knowing they'd broken me. If Vince wanted to play games, I'd show him I could play too. And I wouldn't just win. I'd destroy him. Inside, the house was as silent as before, but this time, the silence didn't suffocate me. It fueled me. I walked upstairs, past the bedroom that still smelled like her perfume, and into my home office. My fingers tapped against the keyboard as I searched for everything I could find about Vince. His business, his past, his debts, anything that could give me leverage. Within minutes, I had enough dirt to bury him. Vince wasn't as clean-cut as he pretended to be. His cafe was just a front for a string of failed ventures. He had debts, big ones, bank loans, unpaid suppliers, and whispers of shady deals that had gone south. It was no wonder he needed leverage. He wasn't just trying to ruin my marriage for fun. He needed me, or more specifically, what my job and contacts could do for him. I leaned back in the chair, the pieces falling into place. Vince thought he had the upper hand, but he had underestimated me. He didn't know that I wasn't the kind of man who would sit quietly and let him win. No, I was the kind of man who hit back when people thought they had me cornered. My phone buzzed on the desk, pulling me out of my thoughts. Another message from the unknown number. Did you confront her yet? I knew it was Jenna, but I wasn't ready to answer her. Not yet. Instead, I stood, grabbed my phone, and walked downstairs. I wasn't sure where Emma had gone, but I didn't care. She could sit in her hotel room and pretend she was in control for as long as she wanted. When the time came, she'd realize how wrong she was. I dialed a number one I hadn't called in years. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Noah, this is a surprise. Hey, Matt. My brother's voice had always been calm, steady, and exactly what I needed right now. You still know those guys who deal with sensitive situations? He paused, and I could hear the concern creeping into his voice. What kind of situation are we talking about? The kind where someone tried to screw me over, and I need to make sure they regret it. Another pause, then a soft sigh. Yeah, I know a guy. What do you need? I smiled, though there was no joy behind it. I need information on someone. Full background. I want every skeleton in his closet. Matt chuckled, but it was a knowing chuckle. Send me the details. I'll see what I can do. I hung up and exhaled. This was step one. Step two would be making sure Vince knew that I wasn't just some guy he could push around. He thought he had me backed into a corner, but I was about to tear down the walls he had built around me. Just as I was about to head to bed, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Jenna. It was Emma. We need to talk. I stared at the message for a long moment, debating whether to respond. She didn't deserve an answer, not after the way she had blamed me for everything. But curiosity got the better of me. About what? I replied. Her response came quickly. Can I come over? I hesitated. Letting her come back into the house felt like letting the enemy walk through the gates. But then again, this was my battlefield now. If she wanted to talk, I'd listen. But it wouldn't be the conversation she was expecting. Come over, I typed back, knowing this was just another piece of the game Vince had started, and that I intended to finish. It wasn't long before I heard the familiar sound of her car pulling into the driveway. I waited by the window, watching as she stepped out, her expression unreadable in the dim light. She walked up to the door and knocked softly, as if she were unsure whether she was welcome. I opened the door, leaning against the frame as I stared at her. You said you wanted to talk. She nodded, stepping inside. The scent of her perfume hit me, but this time, it didn't make me nostalgic. It made me sick. We sat in the living room, the silence between us heavy and suffocating. She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. I don't want this to end like this, Noah. I raised an eyebrow. Like what? You mean with you cheating on me and running off to a hotel? Her jaw tightened. You don't understand. Then explain it to me, I said, leaning forward. Tell me what I'm missing. She hesitated, and for a moment, I thought I saw guilt flicker across her face. But then she sighed and leaned back against the couch. I don't know how we got here. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. Sure you didn't, I muttered, but I let her continue. Vince made me feel important again. like I wasn't just another piece of furniture in the house. Her voice cracked slightly, but I didn't let it affect me. But it's not just him, Noah. It's us. We stopped working. We stopped being what we used to be. I stared at her, the anger bubbling beneath the surface. She was trying to play the blame game again, try to convince me that this was somehow my fault. But I wasn't buying it. You can sit here and tell yourself whatever you need to, I said, my voice low and steady. But the truth is you made a choice. You didn't come to me. You didn't fight for this marriage. You went to him. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel sympathy. Not anymore. And just like that, the game had begun. She didn't know it yet, but the next move was mine. Emma wiped her eyes, though no tears had actually fallen. It was the kind of gesture meant to evoke pity, a performance she had perfected over the years. But I wasn't the same man she had manipulated before. I saw through her act now. Every glance, every breath she took was calculated, and I wasn't playing along anymore. I know I messed up, she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. But if you can give me another chance, I can fix this. We can fix this. I leaned back, tapping my fingers against the armrest. What does Vince think about that? Does he know you're here asking for a second chance? Her face hardened, the mask of remorse slipping for just a moment. Vince doesn't matter. He was a mistake. I chuckled, but it was a bitter sound that tasted like poison. You mean the guy you risked everything for? The guy who made you feel alive? Suddenly, he's a mistake? She flinched, but I didn't stop. I wasn't done yet. Let me guess. I continued, my voice calm but sharp. You realized Vince isn't the knight in shining armor you thought he was. Maybe you found out he's drowning in debt, or that he's only using you to get to me. What was it, Emma? What made you change your mind? Her lips parted, but no words came out. The silence was all the confirmation I needed. You didn't leave him because you regret what you did, I said, leaning forward. You left him because you figured out he's not your ticket to the life you thought you'd have. Her face paled, and for the first time tonight, she looked vulnerable, truly vulnerable. Noah, that's not fair. Fair. I laughed, shaking my head. Fair went out the window the moment you decided to cheat on me. The silence that followed was suffocating. She stared at me like she was searching for the right words, but I wasn't interested in hearing them. I had given her enough chances to explain herself, to tell me the truth, and all she had done was lie. Now it was my turn to make the rules. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the street where her car sat parked in the driveway. The same car I had helped her buy, the same car she had driven to her lover's arms. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what I was about to say. We're done, Emma, I said without turning around. I'm filing for divorce. Her sharp intake of breath cut through the room like a blade. You can't be serious. I turned to face her, my gaze steady. I've never been more serious. You don't get to cheat, blame me, and then come crawling back when your backup plan falls apart. She stood, her hands trembling as she tried to maintain her composure. Noah, please. Don't do this. Stop. My voice was firm, and for the first time, she actually listened. This isn't about you anymore. I've already let you take too much from me. I'm not giving you any more of my time or energy. Tears streamed down her face now, but they didn't move me. Not this time. She was crying because she had lost, not because she felt remorse. You'll regret this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You'll miss me. I smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had finally woken up. Maybe, but I'll never miss the version of you that did this. The sound of her sobs filled the room as she grabbed her bag and headed for the door. I followed her, watching as she fumbled with the lock. Before she stepped outside, she turned back to me one last time, her eyes filled with desperation. You won't find someone who loves you like I did, she said, her voice cracking. I leaned against the doorframe, my gaze cold. I'm counting on that. She hesitated, then walked out into the night. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving me in a house that suddenly felt lighter. Emptier, yes, but no longer suffocating. I stood there for a moment, taking in the silence. Then, with a steady breath, I walked back to the living room and picked up my phone. There was one last message I needed to send. To Matt. Make sure Vince knows this isn't over. I'm coming for him. I set the phone down and leaned back against the couch, the weight of the night finally settling in. This wasn't the ending Emma had hoped for, but it was the one she deserved. And as for Vince, he learned soon enough that I wasn't a man to be played with. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. And I was just getting started.